So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live, this is Point of View. And now,
Nick Pitts.
And welcome to Point of View on this October 15th day, 2019. Happy National Grouch Day. So grateful that you have decided to join us on this Point of View radio show, the Millennial Round Table. I'm so grateful. I think, Kerby, you took over for me last week because I was in Boston, Massachusetts, trying to do the best that I could to rescue any tea that was remaining in the bay.
And watching the Red Sox.
And watching the little Red Sox. No, unfortunately, they're out. And
they were not there.
They are in a rebuilding
Every
phase.
time I'm in Boston, I never get to watch the Red Sox. I want to get there to Fenway someday.
I hope you've gotten a chance to eat a little bit of clam chowder while you're up there.
I have done that. And last time I was up there, some friends had been on the show with us. Took us out for lobster dinners. That was pretty good.
Okay.
Went to Harvard, a few things like that.
Hey, I love it. I love it. Well, so grateful that you all have decided to join us. Joining me at the Millennial Round Table today. For today's show, we've got the one and only, the man, the myth, the legend, Kerby Anderson. Kerby, as always, so great to be here.
It's great to see you face to face, and great to see Chelsey, because it has been a while. But if you're on Facebook, you get to follow her family and all things she's doing very well.
And so we've got Chelsey Youman of Human Coalition Action that is joining us today. And
That's
so,
right.
How are you, Chelsey?
Doing well, enjoying some cooler weather finally in Dallas.
My goodness, yes, we've got fall that is here for the next 2 weeks.
I'm so grateful.
but I'm sure there'll be another heat wave that kind of breaks in. But nevertheless, we've got quite a packed show for you today. Here in the first hour, we're going to talk a little bit about what's happening over in Fort Worth right now. The tragedy that befell Miss Jefferson because of a police officer shooting that happened over the weekend. And so we'll talk a little bit about that. We'll also switch gears and talk a little bit about, randomly, SpongeBob SquarePants. Who would have thought that SpongeBob was a racist colonizer? But according to some academic papers, that is the case for the talking sponge that lives in a pineapple under the sea. And so we will talk a little bit about SpongeBob, talk a little bit about the NBA, specifically the King James, LeBron James, last night, making some waves right now. And I'm sorry, Chelsey, I'm going to air our emails back and forth. I believe this is going to be a heated conversation that we're going to have today.
I'm going to unleash.
Unleash.
Let's just preview it that way.
Yeah, and so we'll talk a little bit about that. And then a violent video that was put on at an event that was supporting President Trump. President Trump has condemned the video, but nevertheless, it started a conversation about the escalation and the depiction of violence in today's political square. And so we'll talk a little bit about that as well. But first, let's go ahead and jump into news that is just rocking the DFW weeks after Amber Geiger was sentenced to 6 years. I believe it was 6 years in prison for her murder charge over the weekend. We had, how many years was it?
10.
10 years. Oh, sorry. Yeah, 10 years after she was sentenced. Now, this weekend, a former cop who is now resigned killed a black woman in her home and was charged with murder yesterday. The former police officer resigned Monday after fatally shooting a black woman in her home, has been booked in jail for murder, according to the Fort Worth Police Department. Aaron Dean fatally shot the 28-year-old Miss Jefferson early Saturday morning as she was playing video games with her nephew. His bond has been set at $200,000. The Fort Worth police officers were responding to a call at around 2:25 on Saturday morning after a neighbor called in a non-emergency line to report that Jefferson's front door had been left open. Mr. Dean walked over to the side and was scouring and searching, and the video that came out of it is just absolutely just tragic, to say the very least. And it has the DFW yet again reeling after a fatal error from a police officer. And Chelsey, thoughts when you hear this story?
Well, it's such a tragic story. I mean, it's so sad. Her 8-year-old nephew was there, and he apparently, I thought this was really important facts to include. He never announced himself as a police officer. He never announced his presence. He did not he did not follow protocol to search the apartment by announcing himself and entering. Instead, he was looking in through the outdoor window and shot through the window at her. If I'm reading it all correctly. Yep. So correct me if I'm wrong, but I think this is absolutely atrocious. It's a tragedy. I mean, he killed a woman in her own home without probable cause and without following protocols that are in place undoubtedly for these reasons. So I think my heart goes out to her. It goes out to her family. I hope her nephew will be okay with time. So I think it's deeply troubling. And what's also troubling is that reportedly or allegedly the police officer was not cooperating with the investigation afterwards. And so this is just tragic.
Yeah, it strikes me at a whole nother level, it seems like, because we have a woman that is quite literally in her home minding her own business, and without alarm, without identification, a police officer shoots at her through the window.
It's wild, and it's definitely a distinction between, an armed pursuit of a suspect or these things that can happen out in the streets, or a gun is reported or a weapon is reported, and there's kind of a question there as to the safety of the police officers. But to me, I actually err on the side of, as a conservative, I'm against an overly militarized police force. I think that there's not really a place for that in society, and that this is an example of undue violence. And, of course, I'm not a fact finder. I'm not on the jury. But based on just what I read through articles, it is very, very disturbing.
Yeah. Kerby, your initial thoughts?
Well, again, let's just add a couple more facts that you added to it, and that is they rolled up. He looks through the front door, could have said, police, anybody in there? Show yourself. Doesn't. Goes around to the side. He actually has to open the back gate to even look into the window. We, of course, have the video so we can see. He says, show me your hands. Boom. I mean, there's not even another second hardly between saying, show me your hands, and firing. And the argument that a lot of people are making is it wasn't the split-second decision you need to look at. It's, as we already talked about with Chelsey, it's all the things that come up to it. Another example of that is Andrew Scott, where they actually had the wrong warrant for the wrong house, comes into a person's house, did not turn on the lights, did not identify themselves as the police. He answers the door thinking it's some kind of burglar with a gun in his hand and gets shot right there. So it's a similar kind of thing where the problem was started a few minutes before he actually even confronted the window and then shot quickly. So this is a good example, probably the best example of a real big mistake on the part of the police force.
Yeah, David French touches on this, and I know Kerby and I were talking about that during before the show got started, but we're going to have to go to a break. But when we come back, Kerby will share a little bit more about what I think is a really important point that David French makes in his article yesterday in the National Review. It's just, I think one of the things that just strikes me so much is that I was talking to a friend that is African American, and he was sharing how he has certain things that he always has to do, that he's been told to do since he was a kid, but now he's never had to have that type of conversation about what does he do in his own home, which was just sent a chill down my spine, just even contemplating that question. But we have got to take a break right now. But when we come back, more from Point of View. I want to direct your attention to our website. You can go to www.pointofview.net to find out more information on today's articles and ways to come along and support the show. We'll be back right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
One of the more controversial features of the tax reform bill 2 years ago was the proposal to cap the deductibility of state and local taxes. This deduction is a benefit given to taxpayers, but it provides much more benefit to taxpayers who lived in high-tax states. They were able to deduct more from their taxes. During the debate, there was great pressure on the Congress and the Trump administration to drop the idea of capping this deduction. However, the bill passed with this provision. The state of New York then filed a lawsuit. Earlier this month, a federal court ruled against the New York lawsuit. The court wisely ruled that Congress does have the power to tax and design the tax code. Capping deductibility of state and local taxes makes sense. For years, taxpayers in low-tax states have been subsidizing taxpayers in high-tax states who were able to deduct more from their federal taxes. Because of this benefit, most of the taxpayers probably paid less attention to the number of taxes being imposed by their legislature. Changing the deductibility will not only be fair to taxpayers in low-tax states, it might also encourage action from taxpayers in high-tax states. This debate about deductibility of state and local taxes raises another question. Why has this provision in the tax code been there in the first place? You could argue that we don't want to double tax people, but the federal government shouldn't care what your state and local governments tax. Your federal income tax supports the federal government. If you want lower state and local taxes, take it up with your state and local legislators. You might consider this cap on deductibility as the first step in the direction of a simpler tax code with fewer deductions. Let's keep moving in this direction. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free copy of Kerby's booklet, A Biblical View on Anti-Semitism, go to viewpoints.info/antisemitism. Viewpoints.info/antisemitism.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
And welcome back to Point of View. I'm your host, Nick Pitts. And now we are joined not only by Chelsey Youman of Human Coalition Action, Kerby Anderson, Probe Ministries, and Point of View, but also we've got Shane Pruitt that's joining us in studio now. Shane, how are you today?
Doing well, Nick.
So
it's
good.
Great to be here.
So good, so good. Well, jumping in on the conversation that we had before the break, the tragedy that befell Fort Worth over the weekend. Miss Jefferson lost her life, a police officer. She was a 28-year-old playing video games with her nephew. Early in the morning, a police officer was alerted on a non-emergency line to go check out the house because the door had been left open. And lo and behold, the police officer doesn't identify himself, does not alert Miss Jefferson or her nephew. And lo and behold, tragically shoots her through the window very quickly. Would not recommend watching the video if it's not for the faint of heart. But Kerby, we were talking about earlier what I thought was a really important point that David French was making in the National Review, talking about how there is obviously crises that befall police officers that require this split-second decision-making, but then there are times it seems as which the tactics that police officers are using, like in this instance, yield terrible results because of it.
Certainly do. And one of the individuals we've interviewed in the past is John Whitehead, and he's talked about what Chelsey talked about just a minute ago, sort of the militarization of the police. And so that's a concern that we can come back to. But David French talks about the fact, and here's his famous quote, "The police make mistakes that heighten their own sense of danger. Then they resolve their error by opening fire." And, you have lots of examples. I mentioned one just a minute ago of Andrew Scott, somebody's pounding at their door. The warrant was for another house. So this guy is totally innocent, comes to the door with a handgun in his hand and gets shot. You have, of course, Philando Castile, who is sitting there trying to comply with the commands from the officer. He tells him to reach for a license and proof of insurance and says, "I'm not reaching for my gun," but he says he was reaching for a gun and shoots him down. Now, I've been in both of those situations before, so I can speak to that a little bit. Years ago, not in this house or even the one before, but a long time ago, we had a security system in our house that we lived in Dallas. And I get a notice while we're in a restaurant that our security has gone off, our light, and so I go there, turn it off, call the people, say, no, the back door just blew open. And yet, when I'm not sure if there's a police officer, I do have access to a handgun, had it for a while, put it away, and I walk out my garage door, and there's a police officer. Now, I thought, what would happen if I'd walked out with a gun in my hand?
Yeah.
Now, you say, well, he didn't announce himself. Well, if it's a burglary, they don't. They park down the street in the alley and come in the back way. So in some respects, what was happening in Fort Worth is kind of standard procedure. Well, you can also think of something else. There have been some times I've come to the door and wonder who's there. If I have a gun or don't, I still have something, even a baseball bat behind my hand, just to make sure it's not somebody that's just going to rush in and try to
You're
attack
on your property.
Right.
This is my property. And so I can give you both examples, and then one more I can give you. I've only been pulled over by a police officer once in the last 20 or 30 years. And
wow.
the one
That's
time
impressive.
I did.
Care to comment, Chelsey?
No, I don't.
And the one time I did, because I have concealed carry, you have to give them both your license and concealed carry. First thing he wants to know is, do you have a gun in the car? I said, well, no. He says, oh, okay. But what if I did? At this point, okay, where are you going to reach for it? And so you can just see how any one of these individuals that has been shot by the police are shot because the police officer is scared to death. They're fearful of losing their life. And so as a result, it's just, again, a trigger action. And is in this particular individual, we see the video where he says, show me your hands. Boom. There's not even a second hardly between the command and the shooting, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it is. It's literally so. Here's what I want to do. Though I want to make an important distinction because we're living in a false dichotomy world that says that we either have to be for justice and against the police, or we have to be for the police and against justice and err on the side of the police every time. I would contend that we can do both. That we can be for the police, that we should continue to support the police. Very biblically, it's very clear, just from a societal standpoint and social science research standpoint, when trust levels with police are high, it creates more prosperous communities. And so, yes and amen, we want to support the police. But we also, as we support the police, express concerns about certain tactics that are being utilized right now. There's been a lot of research that's come out, not only research that's come out, but there's been some tactical training that's happening across the country right now in certain areas that are being retrained to try to avoid some of these crises, self-inflicted crises, from happening. Because the reality of the matter is 30% of Americans, which is around 90 million Americans, own a gun. And we own around 300 million guns. So many of them own more than one gun. And so how do we, in very tense situations, whether you have something to lose or not, because Chelsey, I'm going to throw you in this bus just because when the police officer comes up from behind and catches you speeding, my heart is racing. And I know that all I did was speed. And no comment.
I talked to them about constitutional law. But that's a different story for a different day.
So I know that whenever a police are never called to celebrations, it's always breakdowns because a law has been broken. And so tensions can be high. What are ways in which the power brokers in those situations, which are the police officers, can employ and deploy better tactics to help make sure that everybody's safe and that the peace can be secured? What are you thinking?
Yeah, Nick. Oh, wow. So much here. First of all, I agree with what you said. I think we're in a kind of in a political climate where, if you're pro-police, then people go, he leans right. If you're pro-social justice, people are like, he leans left. And no, we're for both, and we want truth to prevail. Often when I think of things like this, I am in no way a police officer. I have many friends who are in law enforcement, and I could not imagine what they deal with on a daily basis. But I also hurt with my brothers and sisters who don't look like me, that deeply grieve. And so I grieve as well. And so I think often I'm looking at, okay, what's my role as a leader, as the church? And I think, kind of going back to even, the church just a few weeks ago, we celebrated so loudly when Brent, John, both of them, John's brother, showed an act of forgiveness. I think we have to be just as loud when we see grievous things as well, and we grieve with people who are grieving, you know, because it seems like in comparison, the church celebrated forgiveness so loudly and somewhat silent in this area. Yeah.
So Chelsey, let's look at it from the legal standpoint as well. And just one of the things that I was struck last night was when they handed down the charge of murder, which seems like a very heavy charge to level, which appears as because when they handled the charge of murder, isn't there a premeditated component to that charge that's being leveled against this officer now?
Okay, I'm trying not to lawyer. It's not premeditation. There's an intent component. So like an intent to kill is absolutely a part of a murder charge.
Okay.
You know, his defense is going to be obviously that he was acting in his official capacity as a police officer, which means he was on duty. He was in a uniform, in doing the actual work that a police officer would be doing. So it's not like he stopped off on a break and was somewhere he shouldn't have been.
Yeah.
So he is in the line of duty when all this occurred. He has some really strong official capacity defenses there. Where those break down is official capacity breaks down if you're not following the law or the Constitution.
Yeah.
And so depending on, you know, the search and seizure aspects of this, the probable cause aspects, and obviously the death that resulted, you know, there's going to be some pretty strong arguments, I think, for murder. I was not surprised at all.
Really?
Not even a little bit.
Okay.
This was an egregious error and mistake that was made that cost someone a life. And I think, you know, I don't actually always agree with you. We talk about this on the show about how black and white our world is, and, you know, everybody wants to side with one side or another. I think that we live in a world of nuances where the Constitution protects us from illegal searches and seizures for a reason, you know, and that's actually a limit on the authority and power of our law enforcement, or the right to bear arms, also a limit on the authority and power of our law enforcement, and the militarization of our law enforcement to a certain extent. And so in that world of nuance, I know a life was involved here, so I don't want to get too far away from that, but I think there's a lot of room to say we're pro law enforcement, but we're pro constitutional rights and protecting privacy and protecting the livelihood of individuals. And I get sad sometimes seeing some of the news coverage because we get away from the fact that a life was lost here, and like that life had dignity and value, and she mattered, and she had a purpose, and God created her. And that's why I get sad about these stories, less because, you know, of what I talked about earlier. But
so justice will not bring her back, but hopefully it will bring a sense of relief. She's no longer with us, and hopefully we won't be the same because of her. We'll be better as a result of this. And so we have got to take a break right now. But when we come back from the break, we're going to switch gears a little bit, and we're going to talk about a controversial paper involving SpongeBob. We'll be back right after this.
We live in a digital generation. Point of View is reaching this often overly plugged-in generation with truth. You can keep up with us 24 hours a day using your phone, your tablet, your laptop, or your desktop. Search for the Point of View Radio Talk Show on Facebook, where you can keep up with today's issues, learn about current and upcoming guests by liking us on Facebook. Also, follow us on Twitter. Our handle is @PointOfViewRTS. That stands for Point of View Radio Talk Show. Learn, interact, make a difference with Point of View using new media. And here's one way you can make a big difference. Help us increase our reach by spreading the word among your friends. Share a Facebook post. Tag us in a tweet. With enough joining us to plant seeds, we'll see a tremendous harvest. Come on, it only takes a minute. Search for Point of View Radio Talk Show on Facebook, @PointOfViewRTS on Twitter, and subscribe to the Point of View Radio Talk Show channel on YouTube. Learn, interact, share. The Point of View Radio Talk Show. Point of View will continue after this.
are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is
Nick Pitts.
Who lives in a pineapple under a sea? A racist colonizer. That's who lives. So, welcome. I had to come out strong on this one. It was way too easy. There's not a lot of easy jokes that I can make. There's a lot of bad jokes I often do make, and this was just way too easy of line to pass up. Well, welcome back to Point of View. We're talking about SpongeBob here. I'm joined by Chelsey Youman of Human Coalition Action. We've got Shane Pruitt and Kerby Anderson. And Kerby, I don't know how you find some of this stuff, but my goodness, I don't know. I just gave you all the credit for this right now because he was the one.
It just had Nick Pitt's name written all over it. And again, I find some of these bizarre things. This comes from a woman, a professor at the University of Washington. Yep. Mm-hmm. And as somebody that spent a lot of time before I did talk shows speaking on college campuses, you hear stuff and you just roll your eyes on, not really. And so you can explain where that came from.
Well, here we go. So from a recently published academic journal, Professor Holly Barker wrote an article entitled Unsettling SpongeBob and the Legacies of Violence on Bikini Bottom, in which he offers a different take on the affable sea sponge. SpongeBob SquarePants, according to Dr. Barker, and his friends play a role in normalizing the settler colonial takings of indigenous lands while erasing the ancestral Bikinian people from their non-fictional homeland. According to Barker, she calls SpongeBob violent, racist, and the cartoon is guilty of whitewashing of violent American military activities against the natives of the Pacific. Chelsey, your response.
I don't really have a good one. I have never seen SpongeBob for obvious reasons. It's dumb. And so I would have a hard time thinking it's much of an apt.
I'm triggered, please.
Okay.
Please.
I have a hard time thinking it's a very apt critique or statement on anything, but I don't know. I can't see. I think that I was really surprised to hear a professor did this research because in my mind this paper is a C- paper for the class. You think, when you hear the thesis, you think, oh, this is such a stretch. They're trying so hard to come up with something original. Again, I've never seen SpongeBob, so maybe I'm missing something that's just really glaringly obvious out there. But
as a SpongeBob aficionado that may or may not have owned certain types of apparel with SpongeBob SquarePants,
oh, really?
I'm going to say that I was a little bit aghast and shocked at this as well.
You didn't pick up on the colonization.
Well, perhaps maybe I am. Maybe I'm a sympathizer. No, I'm just kidding. I'm not a sympathizer to that. I didn't see those particular elements in SpongeBob, but when you saw the article, Shane, what were you thinking?
Yeah, I'm here to confess, my name is Shane Pruitt, and I have never seen one episode of SpongeBob.
Oh, my goodness.
If I've mentioned in here before, we have 5 kids. That's a prayer request, amen. But yeah, my wife doesn't let them watch, and I don't even know why. I don't know enough to know why she doesn't let them watch. But it reminds me, though, a little bit of my childhood because I was a big Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles.
Okay.
And I didn't grow up in church.
Okay.
In fact, I didn't become a Christian until I was 21. But I remember my mom one day when I was about 8 or 9 left a book on my bed. It's the demonic forces of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, And I'm like, you don't get to give me a book. We don't even go to church. So, I don't even know, man. I think there is an aspect of where we're looking to be offended in literally everything.
Yeah.
And if you're looking to be offended, you're going to find it. It's just, we were talking about law enforcement a while ago. If a police officer follows you for 100 miles, they'll find something to give you a ticket about. You know what I mean? And so I think
Definitely.
we are so busy right now. I think looking to be offended, I don't even know what else to say about it, Nate.
I think if you follow me, if a police officer follows me for plus or minus 0.2 of a mile, they'll probably find something to pull me up. Kerby, your thoughts on the article?
Well, again, the reason I brought it up is it's not worth a whole lot of time and attention other than it's just an illustration of the insanity that's taking hold of the universities today. And I know later on we're going to talk about transgender. This last week, one of the things I found is when I had to teach in a class on homosexuality in this Bible college, It used to be that I didn't even mention the word transgenderism. Now that's one whole lecture in there. But I pointed out at the end that we've had Glenn Stanton on this program, and he points out that in order to hold to some of these views, you have to not only throw out biblical worldview, you have to throw out common sense, because we're only now getting some people begrudgingly admitting, for example, that a transgender athlete actually has a competitive advantage. What? You know, you've had some of these individuals, one of the things Glenn Stanton uses, he says, you can actually order a T-shirt on Amazon.com that says there are more than two genders, but when you ask for the T-shirt, you either have to put male or female. I mean, just you just lose common sense. And this is the thing where we're just losing any sense of balance, common sense, when you're picking some children's program and saying that it's racist, colonizing, and all the rest. It just shows you the reason why a lot of young people are starting to say, maybe I just don't need to go to college. Maybe there's a better way to get there from here. Some actual academic programs require a degree. You can't be an engineer without it. You can't be a lawyer, doctor, things like that. But there are a lot of them that are just starting to say, this doesn't make any sense to spend all this money, come out with $100,000 in student debt, and learn that SpongeBob SquarePants is a racist colonizer.
Yeah.
Man, the truth hurts. The truth hurts, and apparently SpongeBob does hurt. Here's where. So as the academician, so the guy that works at a university, here's where I'll kind of offer my take on this, and then I'd love to hear your responses. I think one of the reasons why we can take heart, and one of the reasons why professors lose heart, is the reality that the average academic paper in a peer-reviewed journal is read on average 10 times.
Yes.
So you spend months on end researching and writing this particular paper, and it's read by an average of 10 people, which is very similar to my Twitter feed. I don't spend months working on it. But I do. So it's this, what I would consider when I think about this, I'm an individual that I was called down in my academic, one of my first PhD seminars. I was called down because I used Independence Day, Will Smith, 1996, movie that changed my life. I quoted that. I quoted a part of that in my presentation and put it in my PowerPoint deck. And I had a professor that called me out for it and said that it was very lazy of me. But the concept is called intrusive thinking, and so intrusive thinking is you find its presence in the absence, and I think this illuminates something that what we were talking about earlier, but it does illuminate the concept of it. I think racism is just on the forefronts of individuals' minds, and if racism's on your mind, you're going to be able to find it in a variety of different ways, even in SpongeBob SquarePants. And so, from a church standpoint, now again. I think it does a disservice to addressing the issue by expanding the issue to exaggerating the issue to an unnecessary degree by finding it in SpongeBob. But it does. But from the Christian perspective, I would argue that racism is aghast. It's against who God has made us to be, and it's against the very biblical ethic and a kingdom rhythm that Christians are to emulate. So, Shane, I'll go to you as the church guy. We all go to church, but he's just the church guy. In this conversation. So how do you, it seems as though, and I don't know Dr. Barker, so I don't know if she's a Christian. So how would you respond to her where it appears as though she is very, very strident and very, impassioned against a call to eradicate racism in today's culture, even if it means calling out a SpongeBob SquarePants?
Yeah, here's the deal: is I think there is real racism. There is real injustice. So let's focus on that and find ways to bring truth to that conversation. You don't really have to go looking for it in SpongeBob.
Yeah,
you know what I mean? And it goes back to when we were kids. The boy who cried wolf.
Yeah,
like if you cry racism and everything. Do you start losing some of your voice when you cry racism when it really is racism?
Yeah.
Like, that's what I'm saying. You don't have to look for it.
Mm-hmm.
It's there. So let's find ways to minister where it's there.
Yeah.
And bring healing where it's there.
Yeah. That was one of the, it just is one of those, it's just one of those components that's where I just resonate with a lot. And Kerby, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. It's there is an issue, as just as earlier as we talked about in the first part of this hour. There is an issue here, and it almost seems as like, and correct me if I'm wrong, it's almost like it's a disservice when you try to exaggerate it and put it in SpongeBob, because again, it goes back to The Boy Who Cried Wolf. It goes back to just really lessens it when this is the thing that you want to captivate attention and take a stand on.
Since we're coming to a break, I'll make it real simple. I've said this before: when everybody's a racist, nobody's a racist, and I think certain words like calling somebody Hitler, the Holocaust, it cheapens the idea of the Holocaust. When we use phrases like racism, even homophobia, there just gets to be a point in time where you overuse a word, it means nothing. And we are actually getting to the point where everybody's called a racist. And so then when you really come into contact with a true racist, it has not the political force and the emotional force that it would have otherwise.
Yep. Well, we are going to have to take a break right now, but when we come back from the break, we're going to switch gears from SpongeBob SquarePants to, we'll go with King James, communist sympathizer. And so we will be back right after this.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. There has been a war on religiously expressive monuments, symbols, and practices occurring in public for some time. The Supreme Court's decision in the American Legion versus AHA put an end to that, but some haven't given up the fight. Back in 1964, residents of Vero Beach, Florida, put up a Lest We Forget monument. The monument itself looks to be maybe 4 feet high and about as wide. On top sits a cross, and at the most it's 19 inches tall and 12 inches wide. In 2017, a group of activists threatened Vero Beach officials, demanding they remove the memorial or at least knock off the cross from atop the monument. But nothing came of it. Now, after the American Legion versus AHA, the same group is making noise once more. And I'm not sure why. As you may have recently heard on the First Liberty Briefing, the Supreme Court has explained that monuments like this are presumptively constitutional. The passage of time may further reinforce that this memorial is in keeping with the history and tradition of our country, but what is certainly true is that those opposed to the cross on top of this memorial have no neutral solution. Taking a sledgehammer to the cross atop this memorial would reveal a certain hostility toward religion that, as Justice Samuel Alito observed in the American Legion versus AHA, tearing down monuments in the name of the law would be evocative, disturbing, and divisive. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
Hi, I'm Kelly Shackelford, President and Chief Counsel of First Liberty Institute. I hope you enjoyed this episode of First Liberty Briefing. You can learn more amazing stories about how everyday Americans are standing up and saving religious freedom. Just visit firstliberty.org. You'll be inspired, educated, and informed. Visit firstliberty.org right now.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Well, Michael Jordan said Republicans buy sneakers too, and LeBron James doubles that and says communists buy sneakers. Therefore, he's going to capitulate to Chinese communists. I am Nick Pitts. So grateful that you have decided to join us today on Point of View Radio, the Millennial Round Table. We have with us Chelsey Youman of Human Coalition Action. We got Shane Pruitt and Kerby Anderson, and we're switching gears and talking a little bit about King James, not necessarily the Bible, but I'll leave my basketball opinions aside of King James. But here's what I do want to say to start off this conversation about his controversial comments that he made last night. So I will say this: he has done a significant amount of good in this world. The school that he has started in Ohio, all his philanthropic efforts, as much criticism as James gets for his decision to take his talents down to South Beach and Miami, some of his problematic comments, just kind of some of his ploys that I'll just go ahead and leave it at that. He's received a lot of criticism, but he's done a lot of good. Well, last night, in a post-game interview after a tough, quote unquote, a tough week because of some of the controversy that stemmed from Daryl Morey, the Houston Rockets general manager, when he put a tweet out that said free, or it was alluding to the freedom of Hong Kong, quickly deleted it, caused the controversy surrounding what role does the NBA play when the NBA's got $4 billion in revenue annually from NBA China. And so King James weighed in last night. And so we have got that audio, and we'll play that audio for you now, and we'll come back and talk a little bit about it.
Freedom of speech, yes, we all do have freedom of speech, but at times there are ramifications for the negative that can happen when you're not thinking about others and you're only thinking about yourself. So I don't believe, I don't want to get into a word or sentence feud with Daryl Morey, but I believe he wasn't educated on the situation at hand, and he spoke, and so many people could have been harmed, not only financially but physically, emotionally, spiritually. So just be careful what we tweet and we say and what we do. Even though yes, we do have freedom of speech, but there can be a lot of negative that comes with that too.
There can be a lot of negative that can come with free speech. So, Chelsey, thoughts on thoughts? I wish you all, if you're not tuning into the live stream on Facebook right now, you're really missing out on a treat. Your treat right now. Chelsey, just go ahead.
I'm going to unleash a little bit.
Let us go. First Amendment, come on.
He obviously learned nothing from the Dixie Chicks, apparently. Americans don't like traitors. They don't like communists. We like freedom, and we love in our hearts, even though the primary debate is tonight, and they're going to be all socialist up there, most Americans still value the fight for freedom and our rights. And how dare he take for granted that freedom of speech that he's alluding to by appeasing the communists, and for what? His pocketbook. I mean, that's really what it comes down to. And then I'm going to go ahead and say that it actually shouldn't surprise me, because if you look at his career, he's been out for one person and one person only, which is himself. He doesn't care about the city he's with. He doesn't care about team loyalty. He doesn't care about anything but himself and his pocketbook. So why would he not be the same here? Why wouldn't he just go ahead and be appeasing communist China because he has $4 billion worth of investments there? So I think it's just completely in touch with his MO. He's out for himself. It's just disgraceful and it's embarrassing, I think, frankly. And he takes for granted the very freedom and capitalistic values our society has given to allow him to be out for number one. I mean, it's ironic because it's our capitalistic system that enables him to be who he is, that he is unwilling to recognize that same freedom.
Tell me how you really feel, Chelsey.
I'm going to just put that there and let callers call and yell at me if they want to.
I've got some pretty harsh takes that I'd like to give, but I'm going to hold back, and I'm going to try to be a good host and let others talk right now, and then I'll unleash. And so, Shane, your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I agree a lot with what Chelsey said. However, there are some things I disagree with. First of all, as embarrassing as it is, I'm confessing a lot. So my name is Shane, and I actually have LeBron shoes on right now. So I am a LeBron fan as a player,
a comrade.
Are you going to break those like we broke our Dixie Chicks?
Comrade. Okay, keep on going, comrade.
So Chelsey said, everywhere he plays, he's for himself. I would say his assist count shows that's not true. All right. He's got a lot of assists, especially compared to the player he's definitely was better than, MJ. So now I'm really getting going. No, but I do agree with what Chelsey was saying. It's like Americans, we want these guys to not like definitely promote communist countries, and I agree with all that. But I will say that that LeBron passes the ball a lot, so it does show he is for his teammates when he's passing the ball.
I expect those shoes to be where my Dixie Chick CD is, and that's in the trash. I want them in the trash by the time we're done.
Well, Cowboy, take me away. Kerby, your thoughts on this?
Well, they've already said a lot, but let me add one thing. What started this was the tweet from Daryl Morey, "Fight for freedom, stand with Hong Kong." I don't think he had any idea that this was going to lead to, we need to re-educate ourselves. So we have to be educated on this issue. I mean, who would have ever thought that? And a very smart person that I've been trading emails with, that would be Nick Pitts, said, as I would agree, I'm not sure why Daryl Morey said it in the first place, but then just the unbelievable response from not just, of course, LeBron James, but from the NBA, where you have them trying to speak out of both sides of their mouth and everything like this. It just shows you the power of China, not only to affect us, but to affect a lot of other corporations in America. And we've talked about this, how Google and others have capitulated to the demands of China and all the rest. And so we wonder why this president has been trying to do something to rein China in. There's a good illustration of it, isn't there?
And you're right. And China's response, in fact, was to censor and continue.
There you go.
Was to censor from their people the NBA games and not allow them to watch it. Yep. I mean, it's quintessential. China's response to this is something that he should be paying attention to, and frankly, not to mention the violence they perpetuate against their own people, and the concentration camps, which I know was mentioned in the article that LeBron James is aware of. I mean, there's just no excuse whatsoever to capitulate to China and raise some tariffs. I'm ready to raise some tariffs over there.
Oh, gosh, of course you are.
Okay, Nick, you got it. You got the last minute.
Okay, go ahead. Go ahead.
I just want to say real quick, all NBA assist leaders. LeBron James is
double down on this.
number 10. MJ is not even in the top 25.
Yeah.
All right, go ahead.
It's because MJ's on a whole nother level.
You can do that when you move around to new teams so much.
Okay. We have got to take a break, but here's what I'm going to promise you. As you all know, I am a numbers guy to my very core, and so I want to kind of expand on the numbers of the market that's that's available in China right now. Why there is so much pressure to appease the Chinese officials so that they would not be silenced, as Chelsey alluded to, that they would continue to air Rockets basketball games. They would continue to have an avenue. But then it goes back to, should this have been said? And not just should it have been said from LeBron's standpoint, which I vehemently just disagree with LeBron, but should it have been said from Daryl Morey's standpoint, dating all the way back? And so that is another conversation that I think that we're going to have, and I can't wait. It's just me wanting to try to rile Chelsey up. Essentially, no. Where I think Chelsey and I are in much more agreement, and Shane I've never thought lower of in my life. But nevertheless, we have got to take a break right now. But when we come back from the break, we're going to continue talking a little bit more about LeBron James. I want to encourage you to go to the website, pointofview.net. Go onto the Facebook page, facebook.com/pointofviewradio. We'll be back right after this.
When you give to Point of View, does it make a difference? Jeremy Dice would tell you that it does. He grew up listening to Point of View in the back seat of his mom's car, and it helped to shape his thinking.
I had parents that were able to sit across from me at the dinner table after we listened to Marlon Maddox and Kerby Anderson years ago and think through what the scriptures say about these issues of current significance in our lives. That's only possible because Point of View has come along and ministered into my life and made me who I am today. And here I am today defending religious liberty, partly because Marlon Maddox and Pettit Dexter and Kerby Anderson were the ones that were pushing me towards all that. They taught me how to think through these issues. They didn't tell me what to think. They taught me how to think.
Each gift you give will change lives. Not every Point of View listener will become a Jeremy, but if they listen for very long, they will be changed. And that will change how they impact and affect the lives of the people around them. So make that decision to change a life today. Join the Truth Team and boldly stand for truth in a world of lies, distortion, and information manipulation. Go to pointofview.net or call 1-800-347-5151. That's 1-800-347-5151.
Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. Each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now,
Nick Pitts.
And welcome to Point of View on this Tuesday, October 15, 2019 day. I am your host, Nick Pitts, on this Happy Grouch Day in honor of Oscar the Grouch. Apparently, we have a Grouch Day. But contra to the day, we will not be grouchy in here. At least I can speak for myself in that particular instance. I'm looking at some of these individuals around the round table. No grouches today. There's no justification or rationalizations that will be made for any grouchiness, even though some of the topics we will be discussing will have the propensity to move you toward a grouchiness posture. But I am joined at the round table by Chelsey Youman of the of Human Coalition. This is so pathetic.
Natural.
It's so pathetic. I cannot. She changed jobs, and this just shows you how much of a creature of habit I am. I still eat the same breakfast for the past 5 years. It's the Human Coalition action. Chelsey, how are you?
Yes, I'm good.
So good to have you. So good to have you. And then we've also got Shane Pruitt. Shane, how are you?
Doing well.
So
Excited
good.
to be back.
So good to have you here.
Yeah,
and then, of course, Kerby Anderson. Kerby, how are you?
I'm good, and I wasn't going to miss this conversation I know we're going to have right now. So I invited myself in for a few minutes.
I feel really good about this, that we are going to be, and we've alluded to it a little bit, but I just want to go ahead and offer a trigger warning since this is the Millennial Round Table. We have one person in particular around this table right now that has horrible opinions regarding LeBron James, and so not to point not to point any elbows if you're watching on Facebook right
Although
now.
I think the person with the horrible opinions about Ron James,
Ron
James is the female.
Led astray.
We're gonna be pretty much arguing with him the entire hour. But let's go ahead. We're gonna jump into it. We're talking about LeBron James. My goodness gracious. We've got the audio, and we'll air the audio here shortly, but let me just set that up for you all. So last night, post-game interview, we know what's been happening right now with the NBA. NBA has a huge market in China right now, but also China has a huge problem that it's trying to tamp down, where I wouldn't call it a problem.
Namely, communism. But secondly, whatever you're about to say.
Persecuting the church has got to be up there.
and you have individuals in Hong Kong specifically in this particular instance that have been protesting, trying to maintain their freedom from communist rule. And Daryl Morey, who is the GM of the Houston Rockets, last week, put out a tweet, I guess almost 2 weeks ago, last Saturday, put out a tweet, said free Hong Kong, standing with Hong Kong as they continue to fight for their freedom, to keep their freedoms. He quickly deleted that tweet. The NBA then responded, trying to make sense of, yes, we value individuals utilizing their free speech, but we also recognize that we've got a huge market in China. And then from then on, the past week has just been nothing but protests and nothing but just a horrible PR disaster. At the 76ers game last week, no less, when they're playing the national anthem of the United States of America, the bastion of freedom, the greatest country the world has ever seen, you have NBA officials that are pulling down and kicking out fans for having signs that says Google Uyghurs, which is a persecuted group of Muslims in China right now as they tamp down on China's human rights. And so it's just an absolute disaster for the PR standpoint. You've also got individuals like LeBron James that talked about last night that has taken it a whole step further. And so without further ado, let's run that clip and just be in awe of King James share about his stance on China.
Freedom of speech, yes, we all do have freedom of speech, but at times there are ramifications for the negative that can happen when you're not thinking about others and you're only thinking about yourself. So I don't believe, I don't want to get into a word or sentence feud with Daryl Morey, but I believe he wasn't educated on the situation at hand, and he spoke, and so many people could have been harmed, not only financially but physically, emotionally, spiritually. So just be careful what we tweet and we say and what we do. Even though yes, we do have freedom of speech, but there can be a lot of negative that comes with that too.
So it's important for us to think about others, according to King James. We reached out to the 2 million Uyghur Muslims that are in re-education camps right now, and they were unavailable for comment. And so let's go ahead. Chelsey, let's start us off. Your thoughts using your free speech on...
Okay, I'm going to rein it in this time. I started it last time by saying he learned nothing from the Dixie Chicks, which is true. Like, Americans... I mean, we don't even know everything going on inside of communist China right now, but we do know that there's violence perpetuated against their own people. There's censorship. China responded to all this, by the way, by doing what they do best, censoring their own people. We know that they do not respect freedom or lives of their own people, and the people in Hong Kong are bravely risking their own lives by continuing to try to maintain their semblance of democracy there in Hong Kong. And it's a venerable cause. It's an important cause. It's one I'm proud that someone who actually had skin in this game financially was willing to stick his neck out, as the coach did, and express support for freedom. And I think that's so important. And LeBron James is ironically utilizing the capitalism and the wealth that capitalism has afforded him as his excuse for not standing up for capitalism and freedom. And it's just, to me, it's just disgusting. I'm really, I said this earlier too. I think it's just quintessential LeBron James to be out for number one. He shows no loyalty to teams, to cities, to even his own country, anything but his paycheck and financial. And, he's had public statements in the past that sound like he's pro-social justice. I mean, at least verbally, he's expressed support for certain social justice issues. But when it comes to something like this, I think it was extremely derogatory. He called the owner uneducated on this issue when I think he actually looks kind of uneducated about what he's supporting.
Yeah. Kerby, let's go ahead and we'll jump to you.
Well, again, if you want to educate LeBron James, let's talk about forced abortions. Let's talk about harvesting organs. Let's talk about the persecuted minorities and all the rest. But let me just add one more. The NBA has been groveling for at least a week on this. Adam Silver is the NBA commissioner. And for our listeners in North Carolina, do you remember when the NBA wanted to boycott the entire state of North Carolina because of the bathroom issue? And then when it comes to talking about the brutalization of all these years of communist rule, we keep getting this comment that it's complicated. I don't think it's all that complicated. What do you think, Chelsey?
Let's just ship him there and show him how complicated it really is. I mean, he's appeasing communist China for financial gain.
Yeah.
That's it in a nutshell.
Okay, when we come back, we're going to have to take a break right now. But when we come back, we're going to review the size and scope of China, hear from Shane, his thoughts on King James and his comments that he's made.
He's wearing the shoes.
Get ready. I'm just going to go ahead and trigger y'all. Trigger warning, y'all. And then we'll also we'll continue the conversation about King James, but we have got to take a break right now. If you'd like to find out more information on Point of View, like to find out more information on China, I want to go ahead and alert you to we actually have an upcoming issue of Outlook magazine that will be on China. You can find a way to subscribe to that by going to the Point of View website at pointofview.net, as well as find out more information on today's show at our website as well. But we'll be back, though, right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
One of the more controversial features of the tax reform bill 2 years ago was the proposal to cap the deductibility of state and local taxes. This deduction is a benefit given to taxpayers, but it provides much more benefit to taxpayers who lived in high-tax states. They were able to deduct more from their taxes. During the debate, there was great pressure on the Congress and the Trump administration to drop the idea of capping this deduction. However, the bill passed with this provision. The state of New York then filed a lawsuit. Earlier this month, a federal court ruled against the New York lawsuit. The court wisely ruled that Congress does have the power to tax and design the tax code. Capping deductibility of state and local taxes makes sense. For years, taxpayers in low-tax states have been subsidizing taxpayers in high-tax states who were able to deduct more from their federal taxes. Because of this benefit, most of the taxpayers probably paid less attention to the number of taxes being imposed by their legislature. Changing the deductibility will not only be fair to taxpayers in low-tax states, it might also encourage action from taxpayers in high-tax states. This debate about deductibility of state and local taxes raises another question. Why has this provision in the tax code been there in the first place? You could argue that we don't want to double tax people, but the federal government shouldn't care what your state and local governments tax. Your federal income tax supports the federal government. If you want lower state and local taxes, take it up with your state and local legislators. You might consider this cap on deductibility as the first step in the direction of a simpler tax code with fewer deductions. Let's keep moving in this direction. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free copy of Kerby's booklet, A Biblical View on Anti-Semitism, go to viewpoints.info/antisemitism. Viewpoints.info/antisemitism.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Welcome back to Point of View. We are back going to talk a little bit about LeBron James, or continue our conversation about LeBron James. I gave you all the trigger warning, okay. Let's go ahead.
LeBron fan.
So for the individual that is wearing LeBron James shoes right now, let's go ahead and go to the LeBron sympathizer, Comrade Pruitt.
Yes, I admit I have LeBron shoes on right now. There may or may not be a LeBron James jersey in our house.
Oh, wow.
You know, here's the deal. He was right. Everybody has freedom of speech. There will be consequences for it, and he may suffer those consequences from what he's saying.
That's what George Bush said about the Dixie Chicks, too.
Yeah,
by the way.
then, you know, and he's saying, you know, people may be hurt, and it's funny to use the word financially first. I think that was intentional. But he's right. People are being hurt now, and that's the whole point of freedom and the need of freedom and people's rights. I mean, my gosh, one thing we haven't mentioned yet is the persecution of the church in China is just unbelievable right now. But yeah, my goal is, you know, Nick, is, you know, really, I want to jam the phone lines here by making this statement, is that LeBron James is the greatest NBA player of all time. I'm talking about player. I don't agree with his opinions. I'm talking about player.
Yeah.
You know, and, you know, Chelsey had mentioned he was selfish, but he is number 10 on the all-time assist
and number 1
list.
in his heart.
Number 10. So that just shows how unselfish of a player he is. You know, and people say, well, what about the championships? Michael Jordan has so many more championships. Those were really Scottie Pippen's championships.
Okay, cut his mic. I can't handle this anymore. I can't handle this up anymore. It just hurts so bad. We'd love to hear from you. You can call in 800-351-1212. Your thoughts on LeBron James. I'm gonna go ahead and tell you all. It's rare that I agree with. Actually, I agree with Chelsey quite a bit.
Yes, you do.
This hurts the very core of. It doesn't hurt the core of my being because that's where Jesus is. This hurts a part of my soul, just because it is. It just like wanting to malign somebody. I don't like it when you malign somebody, and that I understand that. I don't like it when you malign somebody. 2, the reason why he has the platform that he does to say what he does is because of the system that we have. In China, he would not have that.
Yeah, that's right.
Which is just, it frustrates me. So let me go ahead and give you all some numbers to help us understand why are so many individuals pulling back? Why are individuals wanting to not speak out on this? Well, largely, NBA China, which is a separate business arm of the NBA, pulls in revenue of $4 billion every year. It's growing rapidly, to say the very least. Probably the easiest data point to be able to show you the size of the market in China right now. Within all of North America that saw Game 6 on ABC, there were 18 million people that watched the NBA Finals last year. In China alone, 21 million people watched it on Tencent, which is the NBA digital platform. There are 490 million people watching NBA programming on this Tencent platform. They just re-signed a 5-year, $1.5 billion deal with NBA China to continue this. The NBA has 41 million followers on a Chinese social media network. In comparison, they have 38 million followers on Facebook. But just as important as those numbers are, I'll tell you some other numbers that are happening right now. You've got Chinese officials that are burning Bibles. They're tearing down church buildings. You've got Chinese officials that have what the New York Times has done relative to document in a graphic detail in an interactive fashion these re-education camps that upwards of 2 to 3 million Uyghur Muslims are being put through because the Chinese communist officials see them as a threat. It is shocking to the conscience. And so we're living a system here in the U.S. because unlike in China where you cannot speak out, I don't know if any of our listeners have friends or family members that have been over in China that have tried to have a conversation about Jesus. It's very ambiguous, very vague. You cannot say God. You can't say Jesus in these conversations. You can't say Christian. You're using words like father. You're using words like siblings. You're using very ambiguous language to be able to just communicate into the country about what's happening over there because the individuals in the country, Chinese Christians, Chinese communist officials are imprisoning pastors, whereas here in the U.S., sometimes we inflate church numbers. In China, they deflate their numbers not to cause the government to grow alarm. But the good news is, even though there is this tamp down on freedom and human rights in China, the gospel is exploding over there. 100,000 Christians are being added every week, according to some estimates right now. But it just hurts me that LeBron James would have the gall to say what he did and to say it the way that he did, I'm having a difficult week. Please don't give me your difficult week as you're staying in a 5-star hotel and you're playing a child's game for adoring. Don't give me a difficult week. And then you're going to make an Instagram post today about Taco Tuesday that you try to copyright in our Free Americans. Like, don't give me a difficult week, bro. But that's neither here nor there. I said we're going to take calls. We're going to take calls for this 4 minutes. So let's go ahead and jump to Adam. I think I'm already going to like Adam based on the description. He's in California right now. Adam, are you there?
Yes, sir. And I listen to you guys all the time, and I was born a Laker fan. And LeBron James, the reason I like him is because he isn't loyal to no city or no team. And he's a pure NBA basketball child game player. But another thing is he is way out of his territory to talk about anything when it comes to what we believe in as Christians.
Yes.
Freedom of speech, America. And the other thing is that's the only thing him and I would say Trump have in common, is they're loyal to nobody. But Trump made himself loyal to God, and he's not afraid to admit it. And LeBron, I still pray for him because he is a big influence. And he is a big influence to the kids and the youth of America. And so if he's going to speak out about anything, he needs to use the word ignorant on himself before he comes out and says someone else is ignorant about something that they believe in as an American.
Yeah, Adam,
as a coach.
Adam, thank you so much for your phone call. I completely agree. Like LeBron did have that clarifying remark afterward when he said, when he made the delineation, he wasn't criticizing what the GM Daryl Morey said. He just criticized the actual tweet of him actually saying it.
Yeah.
Now, when you hear the original comments, it's really hard to read that into it. And some say that I wish if there is ever a reason, today is the reason. If you're not subscribing, if you're not following along on Facebook, today is the reason to follow along on Facebook, because the face that I'm getting from Chelsey right now.
To use a biblical phrase, her countenance changes.
Her countenance.
I can't really hide my emotions so well.
So it is just okay. So Chelsey, thoughts?
I got a few, but one of them is when you started listing off the statistics, by the way, of financially what kind of skin they have in the game for like skin in the game in China. Can you imagine how much more, if he cares, all he cares about is finances, how much more he could make if they were a free country and they weren't being censored and the market was free to really show their support and watch the games? I mean, it could be a really beautiful thing for his pocketbook for him to actually be supportive of freedom.
And that was correct me if I'm wrong, Kerby, that was the original incentive that of trying to become more robust trading partners with China upwards of 30, 40 years ago. They thought if more money comes into the system, they begin to prosper financially, that will be an incentive for them to create more freedoms within the country. And it's almost as if the opposite has happened.
Yes, and our lead article in the Outlook magazine will be coming out. Talks about that because it used to be this idea that the more they were capitalistic, the freedom would flourish. And I've had friends for years that have been missionaries there, sometimes somewhat covert in China, and they all had to clear out because they opened it up, gave them a chance to kind of figure out who were the Christians, where the churches were, where the pastors, and then Xi Jinping just brought it all down. And it turns out that didn't work out so well, did it?
No. And so we have got to go to a break right now, but when we come back from the break, we're going to switch gears a little bit and talk about a video that has since gone viral. There was a video that was depicted, was a movie called The Kingsman that depicted a very violent scene. Well, now that violent scene has been modified and President Trump's face has been put on there, as well as various adversaries of President Trump, from news logos to Democratic politicians, and it has caused a stir. Even though President Trump didn't have anything to do with it, even though he has since condemned it, some are making a pretty big deal about it, and so we're going to talk about that, but we've got to go to a break right now. If you'd like to find out more information on that video or more about Point of View, or figure out a way to be able to get this Outlook magazine that is going to be phenomenal, as always, you can go to the Point of View website, pointofview.net, but we will be back right after this.
When you give to Point of View, does it make a difference? Jeremy Dice would tell you that it does. He grew up listening to Point of View in the back seat of his mom's car, and it helped to shape his thinking.
I had parents that were able to sit across from me at the dinner table after we listened to Marlon Maddox and Kerby Anderson years ago and think through what the scriptures say about these issues of current significance in our lives. That's only possible because Point of View has come along and ministered into my life and made me who I am today. And here I am today defending religious liberty, partly because Marlon Maddox and Penn Dexter and Kerby Anderson were the ones that were pushing me towards all that. They taught me how to think through these issues. They didn't tell me what to think. They taught me how to think.
Each gift you give will change lives. Not every Point of View listener will become a Jeremy, but if they listen for very long, they will be changed. And that will change how they impact and affect the lives of the people around them. So make that decision to change a life today. Join the Truth Team and boldly stand for truth in a world of lies, distortion, and information manipulation. Go to pointofview.net or call 1-800-347-5151. That's 1-800-347-5151.
Point of View will continue after this.
are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is
Nick Pitts.
And welcome back to Point of View. I am your host, Nick Pitts. I'm joined at the Millennial Round Table by Shane Pruitt. We've also got Chelsey Youman of the Human Coalition Action, as well as Kerby Anderson. We're talking a little bit about LeBron, but I'm going to go ahead and, similar to LeBron in this conversation, just like LeBron in the NBA Finals, just kind of doesn't show up. No, I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. I was stretching it way too hard. It wasn't nearly as smooth as I wanted it to be. Nevertheless, but we're going to change gears a little bit, and we're going to talk about this video. I don't know. Have y'all seen did y'all actually see the video at all? I watched the video, and just to go ahead and tell you all, I've seen the movie. This scene in the movie, one, is just offensive as a Christian. It paints Christians, and the movie is let's just set up the whole context. Movie comes out a few years back, named Kingsman. It's a popular comedy, and it just really does. It depicts Christians in a very undesirable, not reality fashion. And there's a scene in the movie where there's an individual, because of certain circumstances, I'm not going to ruin the movie for you, but ends up just tragically shooting up the entire church, paints Christians in a horrible fashion in doing so. Well, what's happened now is that there is a group that has gone out. Apparently, there's an individual that's gone out and decided to superimpose President Trump on the lead character's body as the main shooter, and then goes ahead and puts logos of various cable news outlets, as well as Democratic figures, onto the faces of this scene. And in turn, shoots up and then kills and destroys some of these media news outlets, essentially, in this new remake of the video. Well, this video was shared at, I believe it was President Trump's, at one of his clubs for an event that he didn't sanction, but an event that was in support of him. Well, in turn, the New York Times found out about this, reported on this, said that it added fuel to the fire, to what is already a hostile working environment, and in turn has created quite the conversation. Well, immediately, as soon as the video and the Times reported it, the president and the White House came out with a statement, indicated that the president condemns this video, hasn't seen it, but it has generated a conversation, to say the very least. Kerby, your thoughts on this?
Well, again, the fact that we're talking about it shows that this is what people want, attention. You know, if you look at two of the articles you've posted here, one on SpongeBob SquarePants, which is a person saying that it's racist and a colonizer, and then this violent video, in both cases, with the fact that we're even talking about it, gives the other side an opportunity to say something. In the case of SpongeBob SquarePants, that's a liberal professor that said this. In the case of this violent video, I guess, maybe you assume they're Trump supporters, but they're just out of the mainstream. And here we go again with all sorts of kind of violent images. I think we've seen in the past maybe a severed head video and people calling for a death. And I don't care whether it's a progressive saying it about a conservative saying it about a liberal, or a Christian saying it about a secularist, or an atheist saying it about a Christian. We need some civility. And the fact that we even have to talk about this just, again, talks about how damaged the American political system is right now.
Thoughts, Chelsey?
Well, I think it just it's really poorly thought out to begin with, besides the fact that it's really abominable that someone would, first of all, make this video, because it plays directly into the narrative that I think should be refuted about conservatives, that our rhetoric somehow would incite violence, or that we would ever condone that. That's just not true. It's counter to facts about our side. And so I'm frustrated that someone would do this and really play directly into that narrative. And I'm not typically one for guilt by association. And so just because some crazy person makes a video and puts it out there that really has no relevance or bearing whatsoever on the credible people at this conference, or that I don't think it bears or reflects on the conference. It doesn't bear or reflect on our president. I mean, it's just a side issue. And I'm glad that he spoke out against it. I think he had a little bit of a duty too, but anyone can make any video or picture out there possible, and it really has nothing to do with him. It's irrelevant. It's a sad side issue. But I am glad that he did speak out, especially in light of some of the violence that has occurred recently.
Shane, your thoughts?
Yeah, I'm sure the video was meant to be a joke. I'm sure it was created to go viral. They know what's going to go viral. But I don't like it. I don't like it at all. I think it's insensitive towards him. I think it's insensitive towards conservatives. And then just with the what we're having to deal with right now with public mass shootings, and like you said, that particular clip is a mass shooting in a church. And I'm friends with Frank Pomeroy, who is the pastor of First Baptist Sutherland Springs, who suffered a real church mass shooting, and one of them, 26, passed away, and one of them is on daughter. And just knowing the long road to recovery that church is constantly under. Once again, I'm sure it's meant to be funny. I'm sure it's meant to go viral, but man, I don't like it at all.
Yeah, I it has shocked my conscience, to say the least. I don't like it. And again, this isn't a one-sided issue. I mean, this is something that's all too prevalent on both sides of the aisle. This escalation. I'm reminded of the Turkish proverb, and it's a funny proverb, but it just this emulates the pendulum swing that often happens. He who burns his mouth on hot milk will blow on his cold yogurt. One side is being hostile, the other side responds in kind with hostility. And what we know is what we're taught as children, that two wrongs don't make a right. It's not right when right-leaning groups put out videos like this. It's not right when left-leaning groups depict President Trump getting stabbed in a New York City play, a Shakespeare play. Yes. We are just putting so much of an emphasis on politics right now, and just this overemphasis upon politics. From a Christian standpoint, Kerby, it's just mindful that politics is important, and it's something that we should attend to. It's something that we should keep up with. But politics is not God. And when you make politics God, it just heightens it.
Well, and that is part of the problem. First of all, let's recognize that from a biblical point of view, you overcome evil with what? Good. And so let's recognize that. And we are to treat others as we'd like to be treated. So that's the golden rule. And you can turn away a harsh, angry comment by a civil comment, if I can paraphrase it in a different way. So we are looking for civility, but back to your point that you made, and that is, in a society that has sort of turned its back on God, then this becomes religion. And we're not the only people to have said that. There are some pretty liberal progressive writers over the last couple of years that have said that. And so they recognize that politics has been the be-all and end-all, and that's certainly of concern. So it seems to me that we should still be people that give grace. We should still practice civility. And if nothing else, recognize that this isn't always the way it was. As the old guy around the table, I can remember a time when presidential politics had a higher standard, where, as a matter of fact, there was a concern that maybe politicians were maybe a little too elitist, which is why Jimmy Carter took off his jacket many times when he was campaigning and he walked down the inaugural presentation. But even Ronald Reagan never took off his coat when he was in the Oval Office, no matter how hot it was or anything. But then you get to, all of a sudden Bill Clinton on Arsenio Hall show, and then you have, of course, Barack Obama on all the late night talk shows and doing jokes and those kinds of things. And of course, this president, he's, of course, been a reality king, so we know that as well. And so all of that is maybe a need for us, maybe not in this election, but in future elections, to see if we can bring the dignity back to the office so that people wouldn't even think about producing this kind of video. You think of the kind of dignity that was surrounded George Washington, and you can't even imagine coming up to George Washington, putting your hand on his shoulder or saying, "Hey, buddy, how you doing?" I mean, there's a sense in which we have lost the dignity of the office, and I don't know how we get it back, but I think that's the ultimate solution, because then people wouldn't even think about doing something like that.
Yeah. Well, we have got to take a break right now, but when we come back from the break, I'd love to hear from you. Your thoughts on this video. You can find that information and find the video, or at least talk about the video, on our website at pointofview.net. But we'd love to hear from you. So what is your point of view on the video that has caused quite the conversation in the public square right now? You can call in 800-351-1212. Again, that number is 800-351-1212, or open it up on Facebook. You can go to facebook.com/pointofviewradio. Under the live video box, you can find a comment section, and what you share online, we'll try to get to over the air as well. But we've got to take a break right now. But when we come back, we're going to continue talking about what this reveals about the temperature of our society, and perhaps maybe as Christians, how can we be the thermostat to try to lower some of the tension and the heat that is in the political square. We'll be back right after this.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. There's been a war on religiously expressive monuments, symbols, and practices occurring in public for some time. The Supreme Court's decision in the American Legion versus AHA put an end to that, but some haven't given up the fight. Back in 1964, residents of Vero Beach, Florida, put up a Lest We Forget monument. The monument itself looks to be maybe 4 feet high and about as wide. On top sits a cross, and at the most it's 19 inches tall and 12 inches wide. In 2017, a group of activists threatened Vero Beach officials, demanding they remove the memorial or at least knock off the cross from atop the monument. But nothing came of it. Now, after the American Legion versus AHA, the same group is making noise once more. And I'm not sure why. As you may have recently heard on the First Liberty Briefing, the Supreme Court has explained that monuments like this are presumptively constitutional. The passage of time may further reinforce that this memorial is in keeping with the history and tradition of our country, but what is certainly true is that those opposed to the cross on top of this memorial have no neutral solution. Taking a sledgehammer to the cross atop this memorial would reveal a certain hostility toward religion that, as Justice Samuel Alito observed in the American Legion versus AHA, tearing down monuments in the name of the law would be evocative, disturbing, and divisive. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
Hi, I'm Kelly Shackelford, President and Chief Counsel of First Liberty Institute. I hope you enjoyed this episode of First Liberty Briefing. You can learn more amazing stories about how everyday Americans are standing up and saving religious freedom. Just visit firstliberty.org. You'll be inspired, educated, and informed. Visit firstliberty.org right now.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
And welcome back to Point of View. I am your host, Nick Pitts. We have been talking a little bit about this video that has since gone viral, generated a conversation. There's a group that was not associated in particular with President Trump, but was supportive of President Trump, airs this just troubling video, to say the very least. And it has caused a national conversation about what are we putting, like just the level of animosity and the temperature of our political discourse right now. The video is troubling. It's not anything new that we haven't seen before. I mean, on both sides of the aisle, you've got Kathy Griffin on the left that has a severed Trump head that she was depicted in a certain portrait. You've got a group in New York that murders President Trump, or a figure of President Trump, in a play in the park. And now what's happening on the right, you've got this video, or you've got our president that's body slamming the CNN logo from Twitter, and it just reveals the temperature of the political discourse in the country. And I would be very interested to know what some of y'all's opinions are out there in Point of View listening audience. And so we have opened up the phone calls right now. You can call in 800-351-1212. Again, that number is 800-351-1212, or go over to Facebook, facebook.com/Point of View Radio. But we're going to take some calls right now. So we'll jump on over to Georgia right now. We've got Robert in Georgia. Robert, are you there?
Yes, hope y'all are doing well. Thanks for allowing me to talk.
Ah, you're very welcome.
I thank you. I believe over the past 3 decades, I've just seen an ever-increasing amount of news, television, radio, printed material that's portraying politics as our savior, and that everything's trying to be steered as Democrat bad, Republican good, versus we have to weigh the evidence. And I just even see it seeping into the evangelical church, as if we could only change something politically, then we're going to save the country, versus changing men's hearts to the gospel. And that's all I wanted to say.
Completely agree. Well, thank you so much for your phone call, Robert. Really do appreciate it. Shane, it does bring, like, it. You're in this, like, you're in a variety of churches all across the country right now. Do you think it's becoming more endemic of this sense of worshiping politics to bring about change? And to a certain degree, I won't give my theory. I'll just say, do you resonate with the comment?
Yeah, I think so, for sure. I mean, and at the end of the day, we just got to come back to the basics of the gospel. The best way to move forward is always return back to the basics of the gospel, and to remind ourselves, hey, it's not going to be a donkey or an elephant that saves us. It's the Lion of Judah.
Mm-hmm.
It's Jesus is the King. And I love what the great preacher from many yesteryears, S.M. Lockridge, said: Jesus is King, and you can't impeach him. He ain't going to resign. You didn't vote him into office. You can't vote him out of office. Yeah. So,
good line.
Your thoughts, Chelsey, as you've been traveling across the strait, across the country, in your space?
Well, I'm going to give some credit a little bit. For the most part, Christians that I interact with understand that. And I think that's one of the reasons a lot of the people I interact with, there are certain issues they might be more passionate about than others. And a lot of times that's because of their faith. So, for instance, on the pro-life issue, I know a lot of Christians are deeply, deeply pro-life and pro-child and pro-woman, and it's because of their religious beliefs. And that's good, that our beliefs should inform our politics and not the other way around, which I think we're all agreeing to here. But for the most part, I haven't seen too many idolizing. I don't think, but of course that's out there. And to those who do idolize, I would say to be careful that we're intellectually honest. We're honest about the ethics involved. We're honest about criminal activity that may or may not be involved, that we just don't have a bias that overrides our sense of intellectual honesty. And really, to me, politics a lot of the times it's a secular game.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it really is. It's about secular votes and secular campaigns and donor dollars. And it really can be, I hate to say it, but not always reflective of our religious views.
Yeah.
Even like perfectly Christian candidates don't act Christian a lot of times. And as Christians, it's on us to sort of be the ethical compass and the moral compass.
I think that's one of the things. Like, at the end of the day, you were striving after perfection. I want to expect perfection, but from the Christian standpoint, I want to acknowledge wrong where it's wrong. I want to give grace where it's wrong. And I want us to be moving toward that particular end. Like, I know no one's perfect. Like, I know I'm not perfect. And so I hope, my friends, I hope you listeners, when I make a mistake, like, I want to own up to it when I acknowledge my mistake. And then I hope we can have the grace one with another to be able to move forward from that mistake. what I don't like and what I'm particularly troubled by is the rationalization of mistakes for ideological purity standpoint, right? Like that's the thing. That's the thing that kind of boggles my mind, to rationalize immoral behavior because the other side might win on this particular point. And from a Christian standpoint, my goal isn't to get political victories. From a Christian standpoint, the goal is biblical faithfulness. Hey, what does it profit a man if he loses his soul but gains the political world, right? Like I gotta stay true to what the biblical narrative gives to me. And if I lose politically, so be it. I recognize we've lost politically once, and 3 days later we were resurrected.
But I don't want to, for lack of a better term, Nick, and forgive me if this is not the correct term, but I don't want to lecture our side too much on that point. I don't want to belabor that because I know we belabored a lot on this show for the reason that I know Christians wrestled and wrestled. I mean, there were article after article after article being published about, do we vote for President Trump, or at the time Donald Trump candidate? Do we vote for him? What are the moral implications if we vote for him? What are the moral implications if we don't? And I know that it was something that was a very difficult decision for a lot of Christians. I don't think it came easily to them because at the end of the day, politics is not Christianity, obviously, and there are pragmatic points to be had. And there are moral implications for your vote. And there are moral implications for policies that are perpetuated or not, or for judges that are nominated or not. And so I don't want to paint with too broad of a brushstroke because I think that these are really difficult, nuanced issues that we as Christians wrestle with. And just because we've maybe gone on one path, we're never too far along to say, all right, let's call it a spade here.
Yep. Share your thoughts. Sure.
Yeah, I agree. I think, I think on some level there can be like, okay, if I identify more with this political party, I can never say anything the other political party does is good, and vice versa. I think give praise where praise is due, and call out what needs to be called out on both sides.
Yeah. I have to watch. One of the things, I want to be true to both sides. Mm-hmm. You can't just call out the other side. You have to police your own side. Sure. I would almost even say you got to police your own side more than you call out the other side. I think you do have to call out the other side, but I think your voice carries more weight when you police your own side. Sure. I think the other side is just going to turn a deaf ear to it. But that still, again, end of the day, you don't measure faithfulness by the results of it. You measure faithfulness just by your obedience to it. Sacrifice pales in comparison to obedience, what we pick up in the biblical narrative. But again, we are going to have to go to a break on that, and I want to commend to you to check out our website to find out more information on this particular topic. You can go to www.pointofview.net, and I haven't pushed our Facebook page as much as I need to. We're continually updating that and bringing together some of the resources that we kind of talk about during the show that might not be on the website. So you need to follow along on our Facebook page, and you can do that by going to it, www.facebook.com/pointofviewradio. And then also want to encourage you to be sure to follow along on us and to kind of comment or like on that as well. And what you share online, we'll try to get to over the air as well. We're going to take a break, but when we come back from the break, more from Point of View right after this.
There's an old saying that the first casualty in war is truth. Maybe that helps you understand what's happening in America right now. Thankfully, it's not a war with bullets, but there is a war for control. Control of the country and control of your pocketbook. Truth is under fire, but you can help turn the tide by supporting Truth. Join the Truth team at Point of View Radio. Learn how you can make a difference at pointofview.net/team or call 800-347-5151. Don't let truth become a casualty on your watch. Pointofview.net/team and 800-347-5151.
So what would you do with an extra $500 a month in your budget? Pay off loans, save it, do something fun? Well, it's something you may need to think about if you become a member of MediShare. MediShare is a Christian healthcare sharing ministry, and it works. You can save big time on your healthcare costs, and you don't have to pay for things you don't believe in either. Find out more. Call 855-SHARE-40. That's 855-SHARE-40. 855-SHARE-40.
Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of view, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now,
Nick. And welcome back to Point of View on this Tuesday, October 15th, 2019 day. I am your host, Nick Pitts, joined at the Millennial Round Table here for the second hour by Kerby Anderson, Shane Pruitt, Chelsey Youman of Human Coalition Action. Find out more information on these stellar individuals at the Point of View website, pointofview.net. We've been talking a little bit about everything, it seems like. We talked a little bit about King James, or as he is trending right now on Twitter, LeBron Shames, during the first hour because of the comments that he made last night regarding China and wanting to stand up for communist China. And so we talked a little bit about the implications out of that. And then we transitioned, talked about President Trump and this video that has since gone viral. President Trump condemned about, really is a video from a right-wing group that aired this video during one of their events that had just very much depicted violence, superimposed President Trump's face on all of these media entities, also had the faces superimposed on them, and President Trump, taken from the movie Kingsman, begins to murder all of these individuals. Talked about how that elevated, it just seems as though the political discourse is at a high. But then it kind of brings us back to what happened last week, which was the conversation that just continued to, was just so fascinating. And I'd be interested to hear, we'll start off with Chelsey's comments about Ellen. And so Ellen was in the Cowboys suite last week during their, what would become their, Kerby, 2-game losing streak, which is now a 3-game losing streak. And so for my Cowboys fans, I'm sorry out there.
Bless our hearts.
Yeah. So how about that Dak contract? No, I'm just kidding. Let's get back to it. So Ellen was seated right beside former President Bush. And there were some that applauded this, saw this as an act of just a kindness, that we can rise above political differences and still enjoy each other's company. And then there are others that attempted to shame Ellen DeGeneres. Why would you sit beside someone like President Trump, knowing what he knows and what you believe him to assert? And it revealed yet again that there are some individuals within the country that cannot rise above political differences and just enjoy one another's company.
Right. So we were talking in our last segment that sometimes, you know, being careful as Christians that we don't idolize politics above the church, which is, you know, rightfully so. And I also have the duty to point out that I think the left is actually far more guilty of that than the right. I don't have statistics to back me. This is just pure Chelsey opinions right over here, but welcome to the show.
My own personal experience.
But I think that this is just a really great example of my reference point for that, because in my experience, especially when I did work with religious liberty clients, people who had been fired, physically threatened, consistently continue to receive threats just because of their religious beliefs. In my experience, the left is far more intolerant than the right of differences in beliefs. And this is just a great example of that, where they came out saying she had to defend herself in a video saying, look, I'm friends with people who don't believe like I believe, which I think we should all applaud as diversity in the world and tolerance, mutual tolerance in the world. But so many on the left, I mean, with vengeance came out against both of them, calling President Bush a war criminal and all kinds of horrible things. And I think it's really indicative of a bigger sickness and a bigger problem on the left, which is an inability to be tolerant of others' views. I would tie this to our earlier segment. Why? Well, if the left maybe is not as predominantly faith-based or has, politics is their number one goal and their number one sense of justice and the way to combat social injustice, if politics is your only avenue to do that, then you're going to take it much more seriously and idolize it in a way that maybe it shouldn't be. Like, we should be able to coincide and really coexist, like the bumper sticker says. Why wouldn't you be able to do that?
So I would almost argue it's a fundamental difference. And now here's where I want to offer a caveat, one, and then I'll move into the kind of broader point I want to make. One, I think there's Christians on both sides of the aisle. I think.
Yes, I was not saying that
I
Democrats
completely agree.
Christian.
Completely agree. I think there's Christians on both sides of the aisle, but I think on both sides of the aisle there is a contingent of individuals that do believe that politics is their God. There's a study out of a common tribe study that indicated that 8% on the left and 6% on the right essentially hate one another. The 8% on the left would be considered progressive activists, is what they identified them as, and they believe, quote, the deck is stacked against them and the world is becoming, quote, more and more of a dangerous place. Those on the right, 6%, which is less than the 8% on the left, are devoted conservatives that said, quote, America is embattled, and they perceive themselves as the last defenders of traditional values. And so these would be the outliers that I think all of us would agree have an unhealthy devotion and following toward the things of politics. Now, here's where I would argue, though, it makes sense for those on the left. So ideologically, liberals, I mean, at the philosophical core of a liberal is an individual named Rousseau. And Rousseau always is operating under a mentality that they have to, the institutions inherent within themselves have to be overthrown. There's a revolutionary nature to on the left.
Progressivism.
Yeah.
We're always progressing forward,
You're
doing away with the
It's
past.
revolutionary in nature. And so Yuval Levin has this great delineation he makes between that those on the right are more reformed in nature. You don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. You recognize things aren't the way they're supposed to be, and there's just slight modifications, slight reformations that are made in order to create a more perfect, just, more perfect union, one might say.
Very reasonable.
So then you've got
approach.
those on the left that believe if there's any injustice whatsoever, that there has to be a complete eradication. You just throw the baby out with the bathwater. You start again. That's a part of the DNA of progressive, not just progressive. Is that a fair? Am I missing anything?
Looks like the social contract.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
I was forced to read the social contract in government graduate school, so that's very much the case. The only point I would make, and I've looked at that study, when they talk about those people being on the right, I think a fair number of them would be libertarian, and they're following Ayn Rand, and so they're not necessarily Christian either. If you know what I mean.
Yeah.
So it's just something to think about. But back to the point, we are a very polarized society, and if we can be grace givers as Christians around the table, we can maybe change this, and we really necessarily need to do so, don't you think?
Yeah. Shane, I'm gonna give you your thoughts. Yeah, I don't want to cut you off.
No. Once again, I think it just shows, honestly, a sign of just immaturity. I don't agree with you, therefore I can never associate with you, never talk to you. I mean, Chelsey and I disagree over the greatness of LeBron. So I would never say, Chelsey, I will
LeBron
never talk to you again. King James, and a sign of maturity is we don't see eye to eye. We disagree, but I see the value in you, and therefore I love you in the Lord, and that we really are we have more in common than we have separate. Isn't it ironic, in the name of tolerance, how intolerant we can be. In the name of unity, how disunified we are.
Yes.
Yeah. I'm sitting around a table. I'm a Titans fan. I know we have a Dolphins fan here, which shows
praise the Lord.
shows
Some
the
real blind
loyalty.
faith.
It's getting worse and worse.
Real blind faith.
But yeah, we can rise above.
That's dedication.
We
right
can
there.
rise
That is
above our
commitment.
differences and still have a conversation. And I want to believe it to be true that we can do that. But we've got to go to a break right now. We'll come back right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
One of the more controversial features of the tax reform bill 2 years ago was the proposal to cap the deductibility of state and local taxes. This deduction is a benefit given to taxpayers, but it provides much more benefit to taxpayers who lived in high tax states. They were able to deduct more from their taxes. During the debate, there was great pressure on the Congress and the Trump administration to drop the idea of capping this deduction. However, the bill passed with this provision. The state of New York then filed a lawsuit. Earlier this month, a federal court ruled against the New York lawsuit. The court wisely ruled that Congress does have the power to tax and design the tax code. Capping deductibility of state and local taxes makes sense. For years, taxpayers in low-tax states have been subsidizing taxpayers in high-tax states who were able to deduct more from their federal taxes. Because of this benefit, most of the taxpayers probably paid less attention to the number of taxes being imposed by their legislature. Changing the deductibility will not only be fair to taxpayers in low-tax states, it might also encourage action from taxpayers in high-tax states. This debate about deductibility of state and local taxes raises another question. Why has this provision in the tax code been there in the first place? You could argue that we don't want to double tax people, but the federal government shouldn't care what your state and local governments tax. Your federal income tax supports the federal government. If you want lower state and local taxes, take it up with your state and local legislators. You might consider this cap on deductibility as the first step in the direction of a simpler tax code with fewer deductions. Let's keep moving in this direction. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free copy of Kerby's booklet, A Biblical View on Anti-Semitism, go to viewpoints.info/antisemitism. Viewpoints.info/antisemitism.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
And welcome back to Point of View. I am your host, Nick Pitts. I'm joined at the Millennial Round Table. We've got Kerby Anderson, Chelsey, Youman, and Shane Pruitt. We have been talking about, it seems like, I'll just go say, we're just in such a fractious, divisive spirit right now that has pervaded the country, and I'm worried as we make our way into the 2020 election, it's only going to get worse. If the past is any indication, so if the past is prologue, you had 1 in 6 Americans lose a friend because of the 2016 election. You had 16% of American Christians left their particular church because of politics. And going into 2020, it seems as though, if this is any indication, things are just going to increasingly become more fractious. And I do wonder, what role do Christians have to play in this? So I think sometimes when we talk about civility, sometimes when we talk about being a light, I think there are some out there that equate that with being weak. There are some out there that equate that with a kumbaya spirit. But I think that there's a way for us to be civil. I think there's a way for us to be kind, but yet still be bold and still articulate our opinions. And so I'm going to kick it off with Shane right now. Shane, for those that are listening right now that are thinking about the 2020 election, maybe they've made up their mind who they're going to vote for. Maybe they haven't made up their mind. Maybe they're already unfriending people on their social media outlets because of the takes that are coming in right now. What are some of the steps that what are some of the words that you would give to them as they make their way into 2020?
Yeah, and I think the church wrestles with this. I think sometimes as the church, we can lean so far on the truth that we forget about love. And then I think probably even a more struggle of the church now is we lean so far on love that we're so scared to speak truth. And to me, like, you can still, contrary to cultural pressures on the church, you can still disagree with someone and love them. You can still disagree with someone and serve them. You can still disagree with someone and minister to them. And we have to, like, remember that. And, like, spirit and truth, it's got to be both.
Yeah.
You can't just err on one side or the other.
Yeah. Chelsey, your thought. I mean, Chelsey, you've had such an experience where you've been on the front lines for individuals that have been fighting for conservative rights, that have been doing so in a distinctly Christian manner. What are some of the lessons that you've picked up on as we make our way into 2020, as listeners are trying to figure out, how do I speak truth but do so with grace and with gentleness as moving forward?
I actually would disagree with Shane that the issue is we speak too much truth and not enough love. I, in my experience, feel that it's a lot of love in the church and not as much truth, frankly, because there's a big price to pay by speaking truth, right? You get called all sorts of names in public. You can be ostracized. You can receive death threats. I mean, I've received threats even just from the show. I mean, it's just, I think there's a lot to lose by speaking truth, but we're still called to do that. And so my encouragement would actually be to continue to just love and serve your community around you. That's the best thing you can do. I'm a former Young Life leader, so that model has always just been really comfortable for me. And they say, earn the right to be heard. And so build relationships with people who don't go to your church, with people at work is a great way to start, and just be kind, be loving, build a relationship, and then share the gospel. And that gospel doesn't have really much to do with politics at times.
Yeah.
And the other thing I'll say is understanding that, you know, Jesus is divisive by his very nature. He admits that in the gospel, that the gospel will divide mother and daughter and father and son and neighbors. And so being comfortable with that and just saying, you know, being a Christian requires us to admit we're not perfect and that we need someone outside of ourselves, and that there's a submission there that I think is uncomfortable for the world, and that's okay ultimately.
I think so here's one of the funny things, because I can see how both of you all could be correct. And this isn't me trying to be the peace conciliator or me just trying to be the prototypical moderate, even though I'm a moderator to a certain degree, is that, like, I've been in church circles where it seems as though, man, I sometimes wonder, are you worshiping God or are you worshiping politics? Like, and they're just so harsh with just the vitriol that what they're saying is true, but it's kind of like a viral video that I shared today on the Daily Briefing. They were the scary clown that was delivering donuts. That they had a good message, but they were doing it in a way that was it was like a scary clown. But then I also understand, I mean, when individuals see you, they go to great lengths to be able to see you. To a large degree, because they have decided, I'm not putting up with this anymore. Or at First Liberty, I should say, when you're at First Liberty, I'm not putting up with this anymore. I'm willing to expend and sacrifice greatly to be able to stand up for my rights. And
well, actually, I would say my experience was more that people call us saying, "Hey, I've been fired. What do I do?" And it's less, and it's us that says, "Hey, you have rights, and if you don't stand up for your rights, they go by the wayside." Like, we need to send a message. And so many times and even in the pro-life movement, it's very similar for women to say, you can do this. How can we come alongside you and empower you to do this? That people often are more timid than that. And it's others that come by and say, like, we will advocate for you and we will take this burden for you and we'll help you navigate this. And, you know, even in the pro-life realm, like, we'll have our sonogram buses get red spray paint every other week on them, and people spew lies at them and paint lies on the side of our buses. I mean, there's a vitriol on the other side, and I've lived that. I've seen that now in 2 different movements. It never ceases.
Yeah.
And I don't see that that's necessarily a two-way street. I mean, I don't see a bunch of Christians spray painting whatever on someone's storefront, or I don't see that that's a two-way street. I've never seen it as a two-way street, and maybe that's a blind spot on me, but I will say we're still called to come alongside those women. And that's why I get back to, like, the relational aspect of this. What can we do in our communities? It's support those, speak truth in love, build relationships, and ultimately just preach the gospel. And people might not understand your gospel, and people might not understand why you have a conscience about the issue you have a conscience about. But all my clients, including the clients, all she would say over and over again is, Melissa Klein would just say, I know I didn't serve the cake, but I'm doing the best to be faithful that I know how.
Mm-hmm.
This is the best way I know how to be faithful. And it's in my business, which I dedicated to the Lord. And that's a part of her. And that's not going to be understood by the world, and that's okay. Like, I'm really comfortable being misunderstood by the world.
I mean, even Paul's going to say this in 1 Corinthians 2, right? Like, those who don't have eyes to see, they're not spiritually discerning.
Right.
They're not going to understand our ways. And so, and that's why I think it's so important for us not only to say the truth, but also to speak it graciously. Because at the end of the day, I don't expect my mom to come here and to know how to drive and to figure out how to get back home from here. She doesn't know the roads. If she doesn't know the roads, then that causes me to speak differently to her, because she doesn't know how to get back to my house from here. Now, if my roommate is here, one, he's not my mom, and two, what are you doing? Are you an idiot? Like, you know these roads. You got to get. So it's going to change my temperament and the way that I respond to him, because he knows better. Like, and so there's a truth component, but there's also a grace component as well. Kerby, have you picked up anything? What would you add to this?
I would just add that, of course, a gentle answer turns away wrath. So that's the first thing. Number two, we were talking about intolerant. You know, there's a place in the book of Acts where they refer to Paul, the Apostle Paul, as intolerant. Okay, so that means, as Chelsey said just a minute ago, sometimes even when we are gracious, even when we are doing the Lord's work, we're going to be called intolerant. As a matter of fact, more likely we will be, because in a society that values pluralism and tolerance, we're going to have to face that. But I still think we focus on the ideas, not the person. We don't use ad hominem arguments. We're willing to ask questions. Sometimes, well, why do you say that you think I'm racist? You know, I mean, it'd be an interesting conversation. How do you define that? You know, and all of a sudden they've got to come up with something more than a label. And that might actually start a conversation.
Yeah, no, I agree completely. And I think really Chelsey and I were saying the same thing. It's really two tracks that the train must run on, is spirit and truth, grace and love. Because, I mean, truth without love, we know, is a clanging cymbal, you know, and then love without truth is powerless, because how loving is it to refuse to tell the truth to somebody? And you even look at Jesus. I mean, especially the Jesus I think that's being shared today he's all-inclusive. He's this really nice guy, and his primary goal is not to offend anyone.
Man, those
usually
blue
people
eyes,
like
though.
that,
Those blue eyes,
you know,
just
usually,
melt me.
and pet lambs all the time, and like people like that probably wouldn't have been crucified. He was crucified because he said, "I am the way, the truth, and the life." He said, "You're either with me or against me." That's not really inclusive talk.
Yeah.
You know? So,
Well, Jesus. Man, my goodness, what are you doing? Well, nevertheless, we have got to take a break right now. But if you want to find out more information on some of the articles that we've shared and talked about, you can go to our website, pointofview.net. Or if you want to go to our Facebook page, we'd really appreciate your support before the break, or maybe check it out on the break, rather. You can go to that at facebook.com/pointofviewradio. But we have got to take a break right now. But when we come back, more from Point of View right after this.
So when people first hear about MediShare, they have questions. Some good ones, like, what is it? Well, MediShare is a Christian healthcare sharing ministry. It's not health insurance. It's a different way of doing things, which leads us to this question. Why do so many become MediShare members? Two big reasons. They save a lot. The typical family saves $500 a month, and they feel great about it. With MediShare, you aren't forced to pay for things you don't believe in. Find out more. 855-SHARE-40. That's 855-SHARE-40.
It seems we can't get through a day without hearing how science has been corrupted to support political goals. Media entities have sold out truth for the sake of favored narratives. Even some religious groups have abandoned the Bible to support things based on feelings. So who can you trust? Kerby Anderson and the Point of View Truth Team are your source for real news. Learn how you can make a difference by joining the team at pointofview.net/team or call 800-347-5151. In a world of unending fog, Point of View is a shining light. Do your part at pointofview.net/team or 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Back once again. Nick Pitts had to go, and so we're going to carry on the conversation without him. And that gives me an opportunity to introduce two different guests. And as a matter of fact, you might even want to watch online because we're going to be talking about something that I think is going to be a real encouragement to you. From time to time, we've talked about disabilities and the need for outreach. This is also, I think, going to be very heartwarming as you hear of Grace Anna talking about singing. And first of all, let me go to Angela Rodgers, who is an advocate for people with disabilities, author of Grace Anna Sings, and that is a book I'm holding up right now for those of you that can watch. And then there is also a new children's book, Who Do You See When You Look at Me? And so those are some things that we're going to be talking about in just a few minutes. And of course, it's the story of her daughter, Grace Anna, and it is also part of the work that she does. She serves on Heart-Supported Living Grant Program Council and a number of other ministries, including the Ark of Kentucky Advocate in Action, married to her husband, Jeff, who's over there watching from the studio as well. Two amazing children, and it is just great, first of all, Angela, to have you in studio with us.
Thanks for having us. Appreciate it.
Talk about this, because you've been traveling around, and I think some of our listeners may be familiar with Grace Anna. We're going to be talking to her in just a minute, but here is a young girl with disabilities, but nevertheless just has a powerful voice. And it's just been a way to kind of break down some of the stereotypes I think people have about disabilities, isn't it?
Yeah, I think a lot of times people, when they look at somebody with disabilities, they immediately judge them on their shell, their outside appearance, and they make certain assumptions about the person. And I think what we have tried to do in both books is capture Grace Anna's life as it exists, showing that a person with disabilities can have a full and happy and productive life and not really be limited to what they can do, which I think sometimes society thinks if you have a disability that you can only do so much, but you can't quite do what everybody else does, and that's not true.
Let's talk about the church, because it seems to me that sometimes in the church we're like, okay, we don't know how to handle this. We don't necessarily, maybe a small church says we really don't have a disabilities ministry, so there are all sorts of questions that people oftentimes have in their minds. So what have you found in terms of the way in which we might be, it can help some of the pastors listening to this today, Bible study leaders and church members and things like that?
I'm hearing you better.
Yeah.
Because the speaker's going
Yes. Well, we're hearing from Grace Anna. She's actually now listening through her earbuds here so she can hear everything. Angela. Yeah.
We have been really blessed to be involved in with churches that treat Grace Anna just like any other kid, and I think that's something
good.
that you really need to do for kids with disabilities. They don't need to be singled out and say, "Well, poor little Grace Anna, we're just not going to expect a lot from her." But I do think the church is a great place to educate children and adults about people with disabilities. I love the part in the Bible where it talks about the disciples questioned Jesus, what had the parents done to have this child that's blind and to show God's glory. And I think he has used Grace Anna that way. A lot of people, their first impressions of her when you meet her is, well, she's using a wheelchair. She walks a little now, and that she's limited. But once you get to know her, God has a purpose for her little life, just like he does everybody else's, and he can use her just like he can everybody else. And I think that's powerful for church. That's an opportunity for churches to talk about how powerful God can work through the least of us to bring forth his love and mercy and glory when you least expect it.
Very good. Grace Anna, we have you up against the microphone there, and share a little bit about this, because you are quite a singer. Tell us a little bit more about that.
Well, I sing for people with disabilities because I could talk a little more about myself right now. I have a rare form of dwarfism called Kennedy-Huneman syndrome, and it affected me. So I have a condition, it's called ichthyosis, that makes your skin dry, and I have scoliosis and kyphosis. So it's containing a hump on my back. I don't think you guys can see it because it's facing the other way. So it's difficult, but I'm like everybody else.
Yeah. And again, I'm impressed that she's able to rattle off all those medical terms. I grew up in a family where my grandfather was a doctor, my father was in the pharmaceutical world, and I don't think when I was 3 times her age I could come up with those names. But explain that a little bit, because that's important for our listeners to understand.
Yes, she was born with a rare form of dwarfism called Conradi-Hunterman syndrome, and it does have a lot of physical things that go along with it instead of just having short stature.
Right.
October is Dwarfism Awareness Month, and that is something that's near and dear to our hearts, is that to educate people. Because, you know, one of the terms that people like to use, and I'm not going to say the word, begins with an M. We don't use it in our house.
Yeah, we don't really use it in our house because it's bad. It's really bad.
But, you know, automatically you think dwarfism is just about having short stature, and it's not. There's so much that goes along with it.
So much more, yes.
And she was born with cataracts. She was blind when she was born, so she's had 4 eye surgeries, 4 back surgeries, 2 leg surgeries, a knee surgery, and she's getting ready to have double hip surgery.
Wow.
Yeah.
But through it all, she has kept her joy and her spunkiness, and she loves Jesus. And
I love Jesus so much, and I always say, "Devil, get out of here in Jesus' name." That's what I say a lot of times.
For some of our listeners, they might say, I'd like to know a little bit more, because first of all, I will even open up the phones. Perhaps some of you are maybe involved in a ministry in your own church dealing with disabilities. Perhaps you have children that do. You're welcome to give us a call, 800-351-1212. But we also have a link to the website, and you will find a couple of things. First of all, I've already mentioned the book Grace Anna, A Heart Sings. And this is going to be a great opportunity for you to read the book. And then we have, of course, as I mentioned just a minute ago, and this is on the website now, who do you see when you look at me? And this is an attempt, really, isn't it, Angela, to help young children, because, you know, when your daughter rolls in on a wheelchair, they all look at her and they don't know what to say, or maybe they say the wrong thing. And this is an attempt to really maybe educate them a little bit more about disabilities, isn't it?
yeah, that's exactly what it's for. It's really for children, but also I think it would be good for adults, because a lot of times we do not see kids with disabilities having, again, those lives that are happy and full. And another thing that I think is very important is that kids with disabilities live lives with children without disabilities, because it builds character in them as well as acceptance for the kids with disabilities. But we have kind of tried to stop using labels so much in our house. Like,
right, of course.
Because, you know, a lot of times you stick a label on somebody, that's what, you know, they see.
So sometimes we say stuff that we're not supposed to say, and which is normal because everybody does.
Yes.
We've had people, like she had a situation about a month ago. She gets called a baby a lot because she's little.
Of course, yeah, they could make that mistake if they don't know the story. Yeah.
Right. And we've tried to explain to her that a lot of times it's just an honest mistake, and because she's get really upset. So we've had to educate her on how to handle it and educate others with a loving heart. And she had the opportunity to do that about a month ago. A little boy asked her how old she was, and she said 9. And he said, "Well, why do you look 2?" And I was like, "Oh, please, Lord, let her answer in a godly way." And she did. She said, "Well, I have dwarfism." And she explained to him, and he asked good questions. It wasn't rude questions. And I think it's okay to ask questions.
And kids are curious.
Yes.
Of course they are. And we need to take a break anyway. Let me just mention that as we talk about this book, I wanted to have some people, if they're watching online, to see how colorful all of these are. And so we do need to take a break, but let me just mention we have a couple of resources for you. And if you are maybe interested in knowing more about the story of Grace Anna, or if you would like to know more about the outreach that Angela and her husband have. This is all on the website, graceannasings.org. So we'll take a break, and there is a place where you can get a pre-order for the children's book and some of the others that are available. And so those are all available at our website, pointofview.net. We come back, we'll talk a little bit more about some of the opportunities that she provides for you, and you might even want to...
Excuse me.
Yeah, and just a minute, we're going to come back and take that in just a minute to give Grace Anna a chance to talk a little bit more about that. But when we do come back, we'll spend some time talking about whether or not you might like to schedule them to come into a church, and that'll be just a great opportunity. So let's take a break. When we come back, we'll continue our conversation with Angela and Grace Anna. All that coming up right after this.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. There's been a war on religiously expressive monuments, symbols, and practices occurring in public for some time. The Supreme Court's decision in the American Legion versus AHA put an end to that, but some haven't given up the fight. Back in 1964, residents of Vero Beach, Florida, put up a Lest We Forget monument. The monument itself looks to be maybe 4 feet high and about as wide. On top sits a cross, and at the most it's 19 inches tall and 12 inches wide. In 2017, a group of activists threatened Vero Beach officials, demanding they remove the memorial or at least knock off the cross from atop the monument. But nothing came of it. Now, after the American Legion versus AHA, the same group is making noise once more. And I'm not sure why. As you may have recently heard on the First Liberty Briefing, the Supreme Court has explained that monuments like this are presumptively constitutional. The passage of time may further reinforce that this memorial is in keeping with the history and tradition of our country, but what is certainly true is that those opposed to the cross on top of this memorial have no neutral solution. Taking a sledgehammer to the cross atop this memorial would reveal a certain hostility toward religion that, as Justice Samuel Alito observed in the American Legion versus AHA, tearing down monuments in the name of the law would be evocative, disturbing, and divisive. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
Hi, I'm Kelly Shackelford, President and Chief Counsel of First Liberty Institute. I hope you enjoyed this episode of First Liberty Briefing. You can learn more amazing stories about how everyday Americans are standing up and saving religious freedom. Just visit firstliberty.org. You'll be inspired, educated, and informed. Visit firstliberty.org right now.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back a few more minutes in studio with us today, Anna Ray Rodgers, as well as Grace Anna Rodgers. And again, we've been talking about some of the books, but let's talk about what's available on your website, because I know that, first of all, people can get copies of the book. They can sign up for the newsletter. You might even have people come and have Grace Anna speak or sing for the groups and things of that nature. So it's graceannasings.org. But what's available on the website?
Like you said, you can have the opportunity to learn a little bit about our family, about Grace Anna's background. You can also purchase the books, and we're going to have some stuff coming up, more on the blog, information about upcoming events and etc. We'll also have opportunities for signing up for newsletters and to be able to book an appearance if you would like to have us at your church or a women's meeting or whatever.
Sure. And again, one of the reasons we're doing this is we really like to feature ministries of outreach, whether it's to prison ministries. Of course, we do a lot to really honor those in law enforcement and the military. But also, what about dealing with the issue of disabilities and what can the churches do and those kinds of things? Now, Grace Anna, I understand that you like to sing. So tell us a little bit about the kind of songs you like to sing.
I like to sing almost it's Amazing Grace. That's all I can say. That's really all I can say. Really, we have a lot going on. So sometimes I don't really have time to sing.
Mm-hmm.
You like to sing a lot of different music, don't you?
Oh yeah, like I make songs up. Like Who Do You See When You Look at Me?
Mm-hmm.
I don't fully know the song yet, but I assure you like to hear that song on my blog.
That we will be releasing a single and a CD, and one of the singles is Who Do You See When You Look at Me, that goes along with the book around Christmas.
I love this. I'm part of a family. I'm a pet owner. I'm a friend. I'm a teammate, as well as I'm a student and I'm an explorer. And that's part of the reason you wanted to do this, is because, first of all, to educate young people, but even adults too, sometimes they don't understand that when I'm dealing with what might be considered a daily challenge of disability, that we sometimes sell those individuals short. And this is why we really want to try to feature this, because these are individuals created in God's image, like all of us are. They are gifted in different ways. And here you have a young girl with a number of, if you will, kind of medical issues, but still able to sing and minister to people. And that's, of course, really what your ministry is all about, isn't it?
Everywhere, there's people with dwarfism, but every one of them is the same as everybody else. That's what I could tell you, viewers. If you're watching this, listen to what I'm saying.
Sure. By the way, again, we have that on the screen, so later on, even if people like to see what she looks like and everything, we, of course, post this on the YouTube video and those kinds of things. But talk about some of the things that you and your husband have had to address, because I understand that you have another child, and so obviously you've had to look at the implications of what it means in a family when you have disability in one of the members of the family. Talk about that, if you might.
When we first had Grace Anna, it was very difficult to balance jobs and family and church and friends. It was extremely difficult. It
was extremely difficult to our family. Yeah, I understand. Where people would like to do this, I agree that is difficult.
But we had to learn to adapt. And my oldest son, Isaiah, is 22, and he was involved in sports, and he was always above average in about anything. And we had to start making time to include him and follow the stuff that he did, his sports and stuff.
All we have been through is that we had a lot of going on. My health was pretty bad when I was little because due to my first bowel movement, the meconium has gotten into my lungs. And my mommy never got to hold me. She never got to touch me. She never got to do anything. She never got to see me. I never got to see her. I was blind due to cataracts. I was not eager about that, but until I didn't remember because when I was born, I remember something. I remember when I was born, I wasn't completely blind. I kept seeing latex balloons and light up balls. That's what I've been seeing.
What we have found in our lives is that when we're going through the toughest things in life, God is always there. He's there through the good. He's there through the bad.
Yeah.
And he always has a purpose for things that we're going through. And sometimes it's tough to see why that's going on or to understand. But one of the things that I love about Grace Anna and my son also is they both have a very strong faith in Christ. And Isaiah prayed for his sister. He was a 13-year-old boy, laid his head on my belly every night and prayed for her. And his relationship with her is wonderful. It's divine to watch the two of them share such a godly love for each other with 13 years age difference in between them.
Yes. And again, Shane Pruitt was with us earlier, and I wish he could have stayed because two of the children he's adopted are from Africa, both with very significant disabilities. And I've oftentimes chatted with him about the impact that has had, not only on the family, but on the other siblings as well. And so there are just a lot of lessons to learn out of disability. But one last time, just before we wind it down, we have a link to GraceAnnaSings.org. Of course, we have the book, Grace Anna Sings, A Story of Hope Through a Little Girl with a Big Voice, as well as the children's book, Who Do You See When You Look at Me? And Grace Anna, I want to give you a chance to say goodbye. What would you want to say to our listeners?
It is actually called GraceAnnaSings.org, not GraceAnnaSings.org. That's a crazy name. And by the way, hope you have a blessed day.
Thank you.
Goodbye.
Okay. Well, again, first of all, I want to just say, Angela Ray Rodgers, thank you for joining us today. I'm glad your husband was here. Glad Grace Anna was here. And thank you for being with us. And if you want to know a little bit more about those books and the other resources and when the song comes out, that'll be a great opportunity.
This is your girl, Grace Anna.
Okay.
Yeah.
Very good. Well, we got to say goodbye for today. Tomorrow, of course, we have a lot to cover. We have a Democratic presidential debate tonight. And at that presidential debate, we're going to be looking tomorrow at some of the comments that will be made by some of those presidential candidates. We'll also have a chance to hear from a number of our guests, including John Townsend, who I think you're really going to enjoy as well. So we've got a lot to cover. But if you find yourself saying, I'd like to know a little bit more about some of the things you've covered over the last couple of hours, you can simply go to our website, pointofview.net. And, of course, we'll also give you a link to Angela and Grace Anna. And so I hope that you will visit the website, pointofview.net. I want to thank Andrew and Steve for their help behind the scenes. We'll see you back here tomorrow, right here on Point of View.
There's an old saying that the first casualty in war is truth. Maybe that helps you understand what's happening in America right now. Thankfully, it's not a war with bullets, but there is a war for control. Control of the country and control of your pocketbook. Truth is under fire, but you can help turn the tide by supporting Truth. Join the Truth team at Point of View Radio. Learn how you can make a difference at pointofview.net/team or call 800-347-5151. Don't let truth become a casualty on your watch. Pointofview.net/team and 800-347-5151.
So what would you do with an extra $500 a month in your budget? Pay off loans, save it, do something fun? Well, it's something you may need to think about if you become a member of MediShare. MediShare is a Christian healthcare sharing ministry, and it works. You can save big time on your healthcare costs, and you don't have to pay for things you don't believe in either. Find out more. Call 855-SHARE-40. That's 855-SHARE-40. 855-SHARE-40.
Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of view, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.